Hello and welcome back to Particular Pixels. I'm Xiaoling and this is my review of the Dungeon of Naheulbeuk, the Amulet of Chaos. The Dungeon of Naheulbeuk is a turn-based tactical fantasy RPG developed by Artifact Studio. The game parodies a great many things, including tabletop D&D as well as gaming. Now, while some of the humor doesn't quite land where it should, and this is possibly due to the fact that it was originally in French, I think it's based on a French cartoon or something like that, and it's translated into English. It can feel juvenile at times, but I will say there are certainly many laugh out loud moments and those that left a smile on my face. The art style is pretty charming, the animations are great, and the gameplay is solid where it counts, but the game is not without issues. I'm not going to talk too much about the story, but you play as a ragtag group of adventurers, or at least wannabe adventurers. The archetypal ranger, elf, dwarf, barbarian, thief, wizard, ogre, and in addition, a bard, paladin, or priestess as the eighth party member who you'll get to choose after some tutorials. Their quest is to basically get a specific statue. Unfortunately, they end up getting a cursed amulet along the way, and what results is a pretty hilarious adventure as they try to get rid of it, get the statue, and escape the dungeon. Now, the story is not groundbreaking, and the humor relies on many of the tropes we have seen before, but it does an adequate job of moving the game forward for the 30 to 40 hour campaign. All the dialogue is fully voiced, which is nice, and the voice acting, while not amazing, is done well. I did find the elves somewhat annoying, but otherwise the banter throughout the game remained mostly entertaining. It is also possible to disable banter from the dwarf and elf specifically. I don't know why they've singled out those two, as well as the overall amount of banter that's present in both combat and exploration mode. There are also a few choices to make that will affect the outcome of certain storyline and side missions, which will perhaps add to the replayability of the game if you intend to play through it again with a different character choice or a different difficulty. The Dungeon of Naheulbeuk, as I said before, is a turn-based tactics RPG, and I'm happy to say that it actually does a very competent job of this. You only get to choose one member of the team, since the other seven are set, as I mentioned earlier as well. Each character levels up and has an active and passive skill tree, which allow for some degree of customization. You can also respec every character at any time with a pretty cheap potion, and I do like that they allow players to experiment without feeling like they're being punished. Combat is what you would expect in a game like this. In a similar vein to something like XCOM, each character has two action points. You can attack and move, or you can sprint further, which uses both actions. There is a cover system, which reduces the enemy's chance to hit. Heroes and enemies can be flanked or backstabbed. There are buffs and debuffs, attacks of opportunity, and an overwatch mechanic as well. You can even delay your character's turn to act at the end of the round. There are, however, some slight differences to XCOM. Every character has a chance to either parry or dodge a successful attack, and there's also a 3% chance to have a critical failure, which is connected to the story. This could lead to casting the wrong spell, falling down, or even damaging themselves or their teammates. When your party misses or suffers from one of these events, a meter falls. They call it the randomia meter in the game, and the amount added is based on how unlucky you were. And once it fills up, it allows you 4 different actions, with the early actions being able to be used multiple times, and the most powerful actions only being able to be used once before the meter empties again. The effects range from giving an additional action point to a single member, teleporting someone on the map, or even healing the entire team a little. I think it's a nice system and can turn the tide of an encounter. I never used it as much as I probably should have, but I think on harder difficulties it will be absolutely essential. There is also an initiative system as well, which determines the order of acting each round based on the character's courage. Your party will almost always be outnumbered in these encounters, so you really do need to pay attention and plan your strategy carefully, see sort of what you're up against. The game also uses what developers refer to as a seed system in combat. So, for example, if you perform a few actions and you're unhappy with the result and decide to reload your game and then try the same sequence of actions again, the same results are going to occur. So safe scumming is not going to work in this game. There is also an injury system, so if your character gets downed in combat, they will accrue an injury, which lowers their accuracy, movement, and overall health. The more injuries they have, the weaker they are going to be. These injuries can be healed after combat with bandages, first aid kits, or resting at an inn. Health is also not regenerated after combat, requiring you to top up your team with potions or resting at an inn. Alternatively, you can delay ending combat to heal them with abilities. Thankfully, there are no time limits for the majority of the scenarios you'll encounter. I wasn't really a fan of these in XCOM 2. There are a few encounters that are going to require that you do something specific in order to stop reinforcements that would otherwise keep coming, but these are in the minority. Also, as you would expect from an RPG, there is gear with rarity as well as a number of different consumables that can be equipped. These are collected through the various lootable containers found throughout the game world, after battles, or purchased from the vendors in the game. Now, harder difficulties increase the enemy's health, damage, and accuracy, along with the cost of gear and consumables. But as far as gold goes, once you get to about mid-game, you'll likely have more than you know what to do with. So potions and buying gear is not really going to be an issue. So you can always kind of make sure that you're well equipped for the next encounter. When you're not fighting, you're running around and exploring the dungeon's many floors, picking up side quests, gathering loot, solving puzzles, and having to disarm annoying occasional traps. These traps are located in certain areas of the dungeon, and running through them will obviously damage your entire party. So you'll need to switch to the thief to see and disarm them. But when he's selected, the entire party moves really slowly. Once the trap is disarmed, you need to switch back to one of the other characters to keep exploring. Now, the only thing you get from disarming these are bombs for the thief, at least as far as I can tell. Outside of this, there is absolutely no reason to switch between any of the other characters in exploration mode. And to me, at least, as a result, this mechanic feels like it just stops the flow of exploration and ends up being annoying. The thief is already in your party, why make me switch to him to check for traps? In my opinion, this could be removed without affecting the game in the slightest. The dungeons are also, the dungeon, shall I say, is not procedural, so the layout and encounters are going to be in the same places for each playthrough, but obviously they're going to play out differently depending on the sequence of actions taken and whether you use the Bard, Paladin, or Priestess as your 8th character. Unfortunately, the game is quite poorly optimized. I suspected as much after watching some pre-release and demo footage, but I thought perhaps this would have been addressed in the release version. Sadly, this is not the case. On my i7-6700K at 4.5 GHz with an RTX 2070 Super, I am unable to maintain 60 frames a second at 1080p in specific locations, with it dropping below 40 in some instances during combat. Not so great, actually. And while a low FPS doesn't really impact a turn-based RPG as much as it would a first-person shooter, it shouldn't be present in a release build of a game that definitely doesn't warrant such a low frame rate. And I'd like to add also that turning down the details to the lowest available details didn't change the frame rate at all. Zooming in with the mouse also currently has issues, so it either zooms all the way in or all the way out. There is no way to choose anything in between, which is possible if you're using a controller. The devs have said that this is a bug they are aware of and that should be addressed in the next patch. Another issue, at least for me, is the autosaving in combat. It autosaves at the start of every single round. And you might wonder why this is an issue. Well, it's barely noticeable in the early game, but by the time you reach the mid/late game, this leads to long delays of 5+ seconds before you can act. You can click on stuff on the screen, but nothing actually happens because it's busy saving. It's not game breaking, of course, but it is frequent enough and it becomes long enough that it starts becoming quite annoying even on an SSD. I would have liked the option to disable combat autosave entirely, since I could just quick save whenever I felt like it. The UI also wasn't always a pleasure to navigate. While it was decent for the most part, my main gripe with it was the tediousness of having to sell one item at a time. There's no quick way to mark a bunch of items and sell them as junk and mass sell them, for example. I think this could have used more work because you are going to spend a fair amount of time selling stuff. The music was average at best, unfortunately, and did become fairly repetitive, but again, you can always disable it if need be, put on some other music. Finally, there were also a fair amount of translation issues, subtitles that didn't match the spoken dialogue, and spelling errors, but outside of that, I never really came across any game-breaking bugs or crashes, thankfully. All in all, though, I will say that I really enjoyed Dungeons of Naheulbeuk quite a lot. The problems with it were minor enough to not ruin my experience. I think that the difficulty, especially in the first few hours or levels of the game, even on normal, can feel a little bit unfair. The constant misses, critical failures, enemies blocking, parrying attacks, and almost one-shotting your team could at least lead some people to be frustrated. Stick through it though. Once your party levels up a little bit, you get a better grasp of the game's various system. It definitely gets easier. It took me around 35 hours to finish the campaign with the presets, along with many of the side quests. Probably not all though. It's possible that I did miss some. I think that the asking price of $35 is reasonable for what you are getting. The combat, which is arguably the most important part of a game like this, remained engaging for the entirety of my time with the game. There is definitely an incentive to replay it with a different character, a higher difficulty, and choosing alternate outcomes for certain story missions and side quests. In fact, I've actually started a new playthrough with a paladin on a harder difficulty. The humor used is going to be entirely subjective, of course, so it's hard for me to make a call there. But I will say, though, that I enjoyed it mostly. So do I recommend the game? Well, as far as tactical RPGs go, it may not be the best around, but I think that it does an excellent job. If you enjoy tactical RPGs, and I do have to add, and can handle the humor, then my answer would be a yes. If you dislike tactical RPGs, this is certainly not going to change your mind, and you can probably safely avoid it. For me, though, I personally hope to travel with this ragtag group of non-heroes again to see what kind of crazy adventures they embark on next. Anyway, those have been my impressions of the Dungeons of Naheulbeuk. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I've been Xiao Ling, and I'll see you guys next time.